Well, welcome to the Samurai Way. I am so glad you're here, and you will want to listen to my next guest, Sarah Ratner. And before I get started, I'll just give you a short bio about Sarah. She's from the UK, and she said, "The privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you are, truly are," by Charles Jung. And who were you before the world told you who to be? As a former COO and founding directors of one of the most profitable fintech, she scaled an operation that thrived on purpose-driven, deeply engaged teams. And now she works as a mindfulness business coach using the Ikigai framework to help people answer that question and build a life that aligns with who they are and what they do. So at this time, I'd like you to help me welcome Sarah Ratner. So welcome to the podcast, Sarah. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Laurie. It's really lovely to be with you today.
And for the people that don't know you, Sarah, I'd love for you to just give a little brief background about who you are. I just mentioned that you're in the UK, but just give us a short upbrief and then we'll go into their questions.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm based in London, and I spent, as Laurie mentioned, just over a decade building a fintech. And I kind of joined this team when I was in my mid-20s, and I'd been a bit of a generalist up until that point, not sure exactly what I was going to do. At one point, I wanted to be an actress. At one point, I was working for The Economist magazine. I was really like exploring different avenues that I found interesting. And then I kind of ended up in this team almost, not by accident, but by chance. Someone I'd previously worked with was starting the company and invited me to set up the operations. And I really didn't know anything too much at the time about finance or tech. But it was a really rewarding journey of working with excellent people, learning how to do things differently in a way that made sense rather than just do things the way they'd been done because they'd always been done that way. And I think that was kind of key to our success. And then after about a decade doing that as COO of around a 100-person operation, 400-person company, although I still loved it and I was still very connected to the work, I did feel there was time for something else. And I think that's quite that's quite a normal thing for people to feel, but it can be quite unusual to act on it. So it's quite daunting once you're set in your career path, but you feel that pull for something else for whatever reason. What does it look like to start again? And that's when I kind of used the Ikigai framework myself to bring in everything I loved, everything that I was able to do to build out what I do now, coaching people in mindfulness and business, as you mentioned.
That's beautiful. I love that, Sarah. And one of the key points that you mentioned was about that you'd like to focus on is mindfulness, somatic work, and yoga. And the combination of those three disciplines, how they help and decide and shape your being and ikigai, everything that you do.
Yeah, I started to really see this when I was running a very fast-paced operation through the pandemic, actually. We
Mhm.
had a big growing team. We had a huge amount of demand to take care of. And I realized that people who are really capable and creative and really innovative in their work were struggling to have the same kind of output as they had before. And this was because they were starting to become overwhelmed, burnt out, disconnected. And so I started to get really curious about the connection between our well-being and our creative output, our ability to be successful in business. And that was when I kind of went deeper I did several yoga teacher trainings, and I started to teach whilst still working in my COO role. I started to teach yoga and mindfulness in the workplace, in our workplace, in other workplaces, to see how it could really support a flourishing in business.
Mhm.
And uh, it was just a stark contrast what people were able to do when they were coming from that place of centeredness. And, sometimes meditation itself isn't necessarily enough, because if you ask someone really busy to just stop thinking, that's kind of an impossible task for most. But then if you bring the body into it as well, whether it's some form of yoga or some form of movement that releases by somatics. I mean, kind of looking to the body, where we might be holding tension that might then come out in as a block in our creative flow at work, or in our ability to switch off at the end of the day and rest so that we can come back re-inspired the next day. So I started to bring in all these modalities into the workplace to see how, yeah, they make us feel great. Yes, they make us feel calm, and that's important, but they also help us to be successful and do our best work.
That's really insightful because, like you said, you can meditate, but if you don't bring the body into it, it's like, just maybe all up here in your head and you're not releasing your potential. And I love that because not many people are talking about that.
Yeah, I think we're not necessarily, you know, so when I started to scale our operation, we initially brought in like really brilliant people into frontline roles that can become quite repetitive after a while. And, as we scaled, the questions were like from my colleagues, were, should we just be now plugging people in like you would in a call center, expect them to sit at a desk all day doing the same thing over and over, no movement, no ability to kind of refresh. And I decided to try something different. I was able to do this because of the technology that we use to kind of make tech the workhorse rather than the person. But then as a result, you can create a much more interesting role. We had 100% retention for the first 5 years of business of frontline colleagues, which is just unheard of in that role.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And I think that's because we were able to scale in a way that wasn't just a case of sit there, do the work, but like, how do we align this person and what they need and what they are inspired by with what the business needs? And that kind of was like the beginning of me starting to bring Ikigai into the work I was doing.
Mhm.
But also, I think it acknowledges the whole person, the body, the mind, the heart. And if we can
Mhm.
do that, then we're going to get the most out of someone and the most out of ourselves.
I love that because the people sometimes compare a person to like an apple. An apple just isn't an apple. It's the skin, it's the core, and it's the fruit. It's all three make up the apple. You can't separate them really,
Yeah, I love
unless you
that.
peel it. No, but I love that discovery that you made, Sarah. I'm sure that that's going to has the fact that you had 100% retention after 5 years. I mean, that speaks volumes. So I kudos to you. And I believe that you have a wonderful business and a good philosophy, really. It's something you're tapping into something. And so, and how would you describe how you use Ikigai for the workplace to scale fast growing teams in agile, creative, and supportive, fantastic retention? You already brushed on that, but I'd like you to, if you could, explain just a bit more because I think that's profound.
I'll give a practical example. So, you know, when you hire people, they often and they should be asking, like, what does my journey in this company look like? Where will I be in the next year or the next 5 years? How are you going to support my progression? And often we're handed old progression frameworks
Mm.
that don't speak to the individual. And I think even now, as there is a lot of innovation in that area and companies come in to do this for teams, it still can be quite generic and quite shoehorny. And obviously, it's a tricky one because we need to be able to create something that is scalable and it can't be completely tailored to every individual as the business gets bigger. But I did this. So I had my team along the bottom axis of a graph. I had the business needs going up. And for the team members, I looked at the combination of skills and interests. And for the business needs, I looked at what is needed now and what's going to be needed over the next 3 to 5 years with our current growth rate. And rather than say, we're going to need a senior person this and a manager here, and once that person becomes a manager, they no longer get involved in this stuff that they were doing. I created a foundation where we aligned what the business needed with what that person wanted to do and was able to do. And it worked really well because then, as that thing in the business grew, this person had been starting to train up in it in a small way, and then they could actually step into that role. So we had people moving into complete different roles. We had people moving into leadership roles within a year of being there because that actually was just a core natural skill for them, even though they hadn't yet done that in a big company. They were just able to. We were able to really foster and nurture what I think is people's Ikigai, right? Who they
Uh-huh.
are. And not only does that, of course, create a happier team where people will stay around for longer, it creates a really interesting structure in the business. What we had compared to our competitors was one person for every 10. So we had a tenth of the headcount for
Mm.
doing the same volumes that our competitors were doing. And of course, again, a huge part was because of the tech we used. But it was also the way we could scale people to actually fill several roles. And, if you have suddenly a lot of admin building up in a startup, rather than just hire an admin person who might not be able to do much more, why not have someone really capable who might have some ideas about how to build better processes and then lead that department? And maybe that might end up looking really different. And it did for us. So that was like it working at its best. Of course, with everything, there are challenges. And when we started to grow really quickly, it definitely became harder. But as a foundation, it worked really well. And if I were to do it again, I would just have more of a plan for how to do that if you're hiring 20 new people every week.
Mhm. Okay. Another thing you mentioned is about how Ikigai is a form of simplicity in your lives and time when we all feel so busy and burned out. And I just want to mention Sarah has a little toddler, which is very exciting, and she's balancing all this. And so you could expound on that, Sarah.
Yeah, I think we could all do with a bit more simplicity, right? There's
Uh-huh.
so much noise in the world. Um, and there's so much stuff that draws us in and throws us around and tells us what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And I really learned that when I became a mother. Everyone's got an opinion on how you should mother your child. The world will tell you what you should and shouldn't do, and it will all completely contradict, overlap. Um, but I really brought this practice of simplicity in when I had to balance kind of having my own business and being a mostly full-time mother to my almost 2-year old, because time is suddenly very limited. And all of these things were really important to me.
Mhm.
So, how do you get to the heart of what really matters and bring that out in the way that you live and the way that you work? And I think for me, that's the heart of Ikigai, really remembering who you are before you picked up a ton of patterns to protect yourself as you've moved through the world, a ton of information that doesn't necessarily serve you. Who are you, and what do you truly value, and what feels vital, what brings you alive? And if you can live in line with that, work in line with that, then you won't burn out because you will find flow. There will be the
Mhm.
balance. And so, again, it can be easy to overcomplicate that. And when I've spoken to people in the past about this, and in the context of Ikigai, often I've been asked, well, what do I do if I find it? And then like, how do I hang on to it? And, life is really busy. I don't think that's what it is. It's not how I use it in my work. It's just this kind of leaning back into who you are and
I
then
love that.
letting that be simple, because it is simple, really. At the heart of it is simple, and bringing that into the way you work. And so that's how I work with my clients in my coaching program. But we don't just look to the mind for those answers. That's why I bring in the mindfulness, and we look to the body in the form of somatics and some kind of movement. Not always, but sometimes, particularly when we're ultra stuck, so that we can really get to the core of what simply for you is living well and working in a way that feels really good.
I love that simplicity because I've heard people asking, very wealthy people on their deathbed, do they ever say, I wish I would have done 2 million more? Or do they say, I would like to have spent time with my family or doing the things that I really, really love, not just money, money, money.
Yeah.
It,
I think it's so much as letting go,
oh, mm-hmm,
needing more, and how do we actually let go? And that's actually normally where I start with clients, because we have all these ideas and they aren't necessarily what is simply truthful for us. And so
mm-hmm,
when you then connect to that simplicity, it's not about, okay, I found this big truth, let's make it work, let's work super hard. It's it's like you can relax into it as a rhythm of life, and it
mm-hmm.
will carry you, and it doesn't mean you won't have challenges or heartbreak, but you will, I believe, have lightness, and there will be more space for love and for deeply engaging, soulful activities.
Well, I think there's quite a few things that you could bring into making memes or quotes because they were so profound. I thought they were about leaning into and making life simple because that's really the core of life is to make. I mean, look at children; they don't overcomplicate things. You watch that as your son grows up, how simple and wonderful things can be.
Yeah, and actually, I think that's also what really inspired me to get simple, 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 because
Uh-huh.
otherwise, like you see how we kind of overcomplicate it for our kids, and it starts drawing them
Yes.
out of
Uh-huh.
that kind of resting place of truth and who they are. And so, how can we, rather than like manage them, how can we be inspired by them and therefore support that, and also find that level of simplicity? I appreciate it's a lot more complex than what I've just said, but as a philosophy, I do think there is something there. And that's why, in the beginning of my bio, I put the Carl Jung quote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Who
That
we were
is
born.
who we truly are. That's so important. And Sarah, there's so much that you've shared with us about mindfulness and bringing the body into it and simplicity. Is there something that you would like to share with the audience before we, shall we say, wrap this up? It's been a wonderful conversation with you. And I know you have a busy day ahead of you. So I'd like you to give the best of your nuggets and share it with the audience.
I think a really useful place to start with all of this is when you feel that feeling of not sure what you should be doing, whether it's in life or work, and you feel stuck. Often this can be like a control or a fear thing. A really useful place to start before you begin thinking and overthinking and telling yourself stories. How can you notice it in your body, and how can you support the release of whatever that is?
Mhm.
Because it's whatever is behind that is probably going to start supporting you back into your Ikigai and bring that out into your life again. I have a ton of free on-demand practices on my website to support this, if anyone would like to try some of that.
Oh, great. And, we will be listing that with the podcast, some of the resources and ways to contact you if someone's interested in more mindfulness in their work and life. So it's been, wonderful to have you. Sarah, thank you so much for giving of your time and your expertise and your knowledge. And just take it from a mother of a 2-year-old and what she's accomplished. It can be done, right, Sarah?
Less is more, I think. Less is
Yes,
more.
less is more, right. Like you don't want to overflood your son with a pile of toys. You just bring them out a few at a time and let them play with that, get tired of that and go on to something else, because otherwise they'll be overwhelmed too with it. I've seen kids with a ton of toys and they don't need that much.
And
They really
it's the
don't.
same, it's exactly the same with people in the workplace. Like, don't just like drown people with information. How
Mhm.
do you support true creativity? It's not by giving them 100 plastic toys or
Right.
100 booklets of information. There are so many similarities. But yeah, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you, Laurie. Thank you so much for hosting the conversation.
Oh, well, thank you, Sarah. And I know you'll want to contact Sarah and we'll have the information below. And thank you. I want to thank each one of you for listening to the Samurai Way podcast, because it covers so much than just one little section. We delve into so many things and you never know what we're going to have next, but it's always has to do with life. And I've had wonderful guests like Sarah on previous. So please look at some of the other previous episodes, because there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge in that too. And so as you continue to walk on the Samurai Way, I want to say goodbye for now. Thank you for listening and keep on walking and doing the Samurai Way. So, bye-bye for now. Mata ne.